This episode of Discovering Doctor Who is brought to you by Psych, because apparently it's really easy to hear the TV through my wall. So if you hear any background noise, that's what it is! Hello all my Ken beans, and welcome to episode 104 of Discovering Doctor Who, which is coming after all of the reaction videos, but I'm gonna put it back in order, kind of, sort of, somehow. But anyway, the episode I'm gonna be talking about today is Sleep No More. And this is one of those episodes where I'm not entirely sure what I think about it going into the review. So let's just get started with my favorite parts of the episode, starting with the different perspective. And by that I mean the fact that the episode is basically entirely sort of in a found footage style. Maybe not always. Some of the camera setups were kind of your very typical like TV angles, but for the most part, it was definitely in a found footage setup, which is basically established from the beginning when we first see Professor Rasmussen, or however you pronounce his name, talking to us. But I have a love-hate relationship with found footage things in general. I feel like it can be done really well. I feel like it can be done rather poorly. Overall, I feel like the style was done well in this episode. Especially since it kept cutting back and forth between different angles, different perspectives. It wasn't just from one camera or from two cameras the entire time. Although it was found footage, we did get that difference of angle, we got different perspectives pretty much constantly. So yeah, I have to say I like that pretty well. But moving on, my second favorite part of this episode was the use of the song Mr. Sandman. I'm definitely more of a rock guy, for sure, but there's just something about classical, or it's not classical music, but sort of like, you know, classic oldies music that just, it puts a smile on my face. So the way that they used Mr. Sandman, I really enjoyed that. You know, not only, I mean, starting with the song when we first see the Morpheus pod, whatever it is, and then all the way to the creatures being named as Sandmen. Oh, and also the computer requiring one of the crew to sing the Mr. Sandman song before it would let him in. I have to say I like that. And I didn't really comment on anything further, so I'll just say the computer itself, those of you that haven't played the game Portal or Portal 2 probably won't get this reference, but is it just, for any of you that have, is it just me, or does the voice of the computer or the system, whatever, sound strangely similar to GLaDOS? It's probably just me, but that's what came to mind for me. But alright, moving on to my third favorite part of this episode. It's the... I assume that this is more so the theme they were going with overall when this episode was written, but it was the combination of Morpheus and corporate life. Because these days we live in a society, especially in America, where we have to constantly keep going, and as the internet has become a thing, as technology continues to improve and get faster and faster, we're just kind of expected to do more all the time, and it becomes even more difficult to balance personal life with business life. And just the idea of the Morpheus machines being able to basically eliminate any need for caffeine, any need for any stimulants, anything like that. It's a realistic course that I can see our society going in. Hopefully not. I mean, that would be for any fans of Community might like this, but that sounds kind of like the Darkest Timeline kind of ideas. But yeah, it seems realistic, and I liked how it did that sort of commentary on the idea of how society is, and I mean, Clara mentioned how horrible it is. The Doctor did, and so did one of the crew members, though I can't remember his name. None of the none of the crew member names really stuck out to me, which I'll comment on later. But yeah, I really like that comparison they pulled, and although it wasn't exactly subtle at all, I did enjoy how they employed it into the episode, especially with the little tutorial or advertisement, I suppose it was, after they meet Rasmussen and he uses the advertisement to explain what Morpheus is. Alright, moving on from there, my fourth favorite part of this episode is the sleep dust. In a few different forms. First of all, well, the creatures themselves I found rather interesting. They definitely reminded me of Sandmen's type of creatures that I've seen in different works of fiction before. Not the best designed, I would say, but, you know, they're a humanoid overall, and I don't know, there's just something about them that the style I really liked overall. But then there's more than that. It's the idea of how the Sandmen worked, or what the sleep dust was, and where it came from, and that the Morpheus machines, by essentially keeping people up for long periods of time, cause the sleep dust bacteria to evolve over time. And, you know, who knows how long Morpheus has been in action, how long it's been working, and I don't know, there's something about the sleep dust and the way it's employed in this episode that I definitely enjoyed. I would say the aspect of it, the dust itself and the forming of the creatures, more so than the creatures themselves. I'm probably rambling right now, and I apologize. But anyway, let's move on to my fifth and final favorite part of this episode. And that's when the line is said, "We don't have helmet cams." And then later the Doctor said, "What did you say? 1.85 minutes ago?" And she says, "We don't have helmet cams." And that's when just the twist really comes in. That's when we find out, that's when, you know, everything is revealed. We find out where this footage is coming from, and just the idea of what is going on starts to sink in, and the mystery continues to, I don't know, I sound like I'm rambling, or I feel like I'm rambling at least, but just that line right there, it just sort of was, it set off something in my head. I was just like, oh, they don't have helmet cams, really? Because that entire time, again, I had been thinking that we were just getting footage from the helmet cams and then maybe cameras around the station. But then, as the Doctor points out, there are no cameras. It's like there was a shot from Clara's perspective. She obviously doesn't have her camera on her, and just the way all that was employed, I really, really liked it. It just added this level of mystery and suspense that I really, really liked. However, it's time to get into my annoyances, and although there are fewer of them as far as the number on the list goes, I have to say they're pretty significant. Okay, so my first annoyance with the episode was the crew. And by that I mean just, I feel like the crew was basically just characters that were put there to be the cameras. That's, in the end, that's all they really felt like. I didn't connect with any of the characters, even the one that was, again, I can't remember his name, but the one that had never used Morpheus, or he refuses to use it, the one that's the more logical, free thinking of the crew, I couldn't really connect with him because he acted so childish in the end. So yeah, the biggest issue, well, not biggest, but one of my big issues with this episode was just the crew, their existence, and the fact that I feel like they weren't really even necessary for the story. Like, the story could have been done in a different way, or even just had one crew member. Like, one crew member arrives, the others die. I don't know, it just could have been done different ways that I feel like would have been more effective overall. Okay, as for my second annoyance with this episode, the sleep dust. Now, I mentioned that was one of my favorite parts as well. However, um, just the sleep dust itself, while I liked the design of the humanoid Sandmen, they weren't exactly, like, there were moments where they were supposed to be intimidating, like, they were supposed to be scary, where it just looks like someone steps out dressed in dirt or sand like colors, just kind of like standing there and jiggling like they and it's so annoying because, okay, they're attracted to sound, they can't see, so but all of a sudden, like 3 or 4 of them all end up in the same area, and then they stop and they're moving around because they can't see, they can only hear. But that doesn't make any sense. And just the way they were standing there in front of the TARDIS and by the door, just, it looked dumb. Like, if they were moving toward them actively, if they were moving toward the Doctor, Clara, and the one remaining crew person, the captain, I believe it was, that would have been a bit intimidating, but they're literally standing there and shaking, and it, a nitpick, I'm sure, but it just, that really bothered me and just bugged me a lot. Now, my final annoyance with the episode, I believe that most people are going to consider this a nitpick, and I have to say, I mean, all of this is opinion, obviously, but this is definitely one that just bothers me the most. And it's that the episode is just weird. It doesn't... The Doctor himself says this. It doesn't make any sense, really. Like, when I've referred to standalone episodes in the past, it felt like there was still some sort of connection to the other episodes in the series. But this one... it was so different in style, and so just out there in what they were trying to portray. It's, put it simply, it's weird and it doesn't make sense. Like, okay, the video was meant to be an alibi for the Professor, which the Doctor and Clara and the Captain see before he reveals his true plans. But why did all that start getting put together before? Again, just to quote the Doctor, it makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense. And that's really one of the things that bothers me about the episode. I would definitely say that's probably the biggest issue. And as silly as it seems, like that being a major issue, especially in a show where a lot of weird stuff happens, it just... there's usually logic to the weirdness. There's usually some reason for it. But as we find out in the very end, when the Professor's true form, I suppose, is revealed, it just leaves you sitting there like, what? Or at least it left me that way. But, alright, to move on from there, as always, if you have any of your own favorites, your own annoyances, if you have any commentary upon my favorites and or annoyances, please do leave them in the comments down below. But moving on from there, I didn't really have a question per se for this episode, but, and as you know, it's like one of my favorite parts was actually a quote itself. It's like, we don't have helmet cams. That's one of the things I considered for quote of the episode, but there was one line in particular that is overall really innocuous, I think, but it stood out the most to me. It's the line that even after I finished watching just stood out the most and kept coming back to me. And it's, I believe it's right after the demonstration of Morpheus is shown, and Professor Rasmussen says, "Time is money." And that goes back to what I was talking about with just the way our society is right now. Again, especially in the US. But then in the future, when they have this capability of never having to sleep, of having no need for caffeine or stimulants, just constantly in 5-minute intervals. They get supposedly a full night's sleep, and time is money, so the more time you have, the more money you can get. Which, actually, speaking of which, with me wanting to do PapaKennMedia as a business, part of me sees the intrigue in that, but obviously it's not a good thing. But just that phrase right there, time is money, and any of the implications that you can have behind that line, whether it be in the context of this episode or in real life, just that line just stood out to me the most, and again, it just keeps repeating itself in my head. And hopefully it'll stop so I can go to sleep soon. Ironic. But, alright, moving on from there, no theory for this episode. It's a very simplistic one, I guess you would say. But as for my overall thoughts on Sleep No More, as I said, coming into this, I didn't really have a full idea of what I thought about it, and I'm still left feeling that way. It's not a bad episode by any means. The story, the idea of what's going on, and the mystery surrounding it is definitely intriguing. It kept me involved. But at the same time, we get all of this confusing narrative that it's like, at first it seems pretty straightforward, but then as the end comes, it kind of takes everything that already occurred and just leaves you saying, what? Just leaves you saying, what happened? So none of that actually happened? Or did it happen and the professor was just telling lies? Or I don't know. I don't know. It's just, it leaves me so very confused. So I would honestly have to say that of the episodes in this series, this is probably my least favorite one, just because of how strange it is. Now, on one hand, that also makes it sort of like one of the most intriguing episodes, and definitely one of the most ambitious episodes that they did. Not necessarily the most ambitious, but one of, in just the style that they did it. And I feel like they were trying to reach for something really big there, especially with the end, the way it ended all creepy with the professor's face melting into sand / sleep dust. But it just, in the end, fell apart in the execution. I don't know, maybe watching the episode again sometime will sort of straighten things out for me, but as it stands, I just don't really care for the episode overall. It's one that unlike ones I usually don't care for, it is one that I want to revisit at some point just to see if maybe I missed something, or, you know, maybe it's just a second view will sort of clear things up for me. Hard to say, but yeah, that's just my personal feelings on it. Well, next time, everyone, we will be watching, or I will be discussing Face the Raven, an episode that if you've seen the reaction for, you might have an idea of how I feel about it. But yeah, that's one that will be interesting to review. But anyway, as always, everyone, thank you very much for joining me for episode 104 of Discovering Doctor Who. As always, if you have any other thoughts as to this episode, please do leave them in the comments down below. I always enjoy looking at your thoughts, and if I'm not able to respond, it's not because I haven't read your comment, it's just because I don't always have time, especially as the channel continues to grow. But let's go ahead and get this over with. I actually believe I seem to have misplaced my sonic screwdriver again. So let's see who will help us with the ending this time. It will be Lucario from Pokemon, whatever. But anyway, again, everyone, thank you very much for joining me for this episode, and I will see you all next time for for my review of Face the Raven. Until next time, everyone, Alonzi!